Welcome Game Chasers everywhere to episode 37 of the Collecting Confidant with your host GunstarHero, and I'm back with another installment of the Solar News Report, otherwise known as the State of Limited Print and Retail News, where instead of doing a review of one particular title, I get into a multitude of games in a preview format with a certain theme cutting through across the titles. So this week I'm going to be doing a theme of RTS meets shooters, and we've got a whole bunch of cool stuff to talk about. The first game is a remake of a classic, cult classic to be exact, from the PS2 era. This one's going to be called GrimGrimoire OnceMore, which is already available in Japan digitally for the PS4 and Switch as of July 28, 2022, but is also going to be getting a worldwide release in Q2 2023 for the PS5, the Switch, and the PS4, and is going to be coming to us physically both via retail and via the Nippon Ishi Software or NIS site. So I'll be getting into details of that later. But again, GrimGrimoire OnceMore is a remaster / remake of the original 2007 PS2 classic, and is going to introduce a lot of quality of life improvements to bring this into the modern age and address some of the criticisms of this otherwise beautiful and difficult but wonderfully complex game that I think stands the test of time, and with this remake is going to even go further than its original heights. So let's get into the game itself. I did spend quite a bit of time with the original PS2 game, which of course I own, and I played quite a few hours of it just to get an idea of what to expect from the remaster. Overall, the gameplay seems to be intact, because I was able to view some of the demo footage on YouTube to get an idea of what the remaster is going to look like in comparison to the original. And I can say that from my experience with the PS2 version, I can comfortably talk about what to expect with the new version. So, like I said, this is a 2D real-time strategy game, or an RTS, that was inspired by StarCraft. Vanillaware, otherwise known as the makers of the excellent Dragon's Crown and Muramasa games, and the more recently released 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, they were big StarCraft fans back in the mid-aughts, and they wanted to make their own version, hence GrimGrimoire is what they came up with. So very briefly in terms of story, the game has very similar beats to the Harry Potter series and the Atelier Marie series, which were the main influences for GrimGrimoire. You play as this young trainee magician known as Lilith Bland, who goes to the Silver Star Tower to learn her magic and encounter all the different weird professors there who are going to teach her all the different things about runes and spells to add pages to her GrimGrimoire and make her into the ultimate magician she was destined to be. So over the course of the story, you're going to be learning different magical spells, which will help you dispel all the different secrets within the tower and essentially help your friends fight against their impending doom and from the lurking shadows within the tower. So what's really cool about this story is that it's very circular. It takes place over 5 days, but these 5 days end up repeating several times. As you progress through the story, you're going to be accumulating magic and knowledge about how the tower and the school works, but every time you restart the 5-day cycle, the people you encounter won't remember what happened, but you do. So that gives you kind of like this agency and be able to drive the narrative forward, and it gets very complex, and there's a lot of intrigue and drama therein, so you'll definitely enjoy the story. And the way it works is that the action sequences, which are the real-time strategy, are bookended by the story sequences. So typically, when you start a new chapter, you'll encounter a professor who will give you a preview of the different rune you're going to be working with and teach you some of the new spells. Then you'll put it into effect in the gameplay sequences, and then once that gameplay sequence is done, you'll get some more story exposition, which will push the narrative forward and such. So let's talk about the gameplay itself. Very briefly, the way it works is that there are 4 different types of magic that you're going to be learning. You'll start off with the glamour magic, which is like a very earthly base, which allows you to summon elves and fairies, unicorns, and that kind of type. But then over the course of the game, you're also going to learn about alchemy magic, sorcery magic, and necromancy. And if you're ever confused, there actually is a manual that'll show you which types of magic overpower the others in like this rock, paper, scissors kind of Dungeons and Dragons format where some magics are more powerful than others, but then those magics can be overpowered by other types of magic. So you'll get used to that flow the more you play the game. And then each type of magic has its own associated familiars that you can summon during battle for different purposes. So let's give you an example of how the glamour magic works, which is the first one you'll be working with. So when you start a game, you'll be inside of a tower that you can zoom in and out of. It's all a 2D plane, and you'll have a rune that you start with from which you can summon your familiars. So typically the first thing you'll want to do is you'll want to summon your gathering familiars like your elves, which will then go out to the most close by crystal. They'll find that crystal from which they're going to collect mana from, but the first thing they have to do is they have to turn it into a sanctuary so that they're able to harvest the mana from it. So you'll start off by harvesting mana, and the more elves you have summoned, the quicker you'll be able to harvest that mana. So you'll actually see them walking back and forth, taking the crystals back to your rune, and you'll start to see your mana reserves increase more and more because these are the currency you're going to use to power your fight and keep yourself afloat, to protect your runes. Because essentially with these games, there are two different objectives in the levels. Either A, you'll have to protect your runes and destroy the enemy runes, or you'll have a certain amount of time where you have to just protect your runes and try to survive the round. Most of the levels, though, will be the first scenario where you have to go scout out and destroy the enemy runes. So what you'll do is you'll gather magic and then be able to summon your attack and defense forces, which will be, in this case with glamour magic, your fairies. So then they'll be able to patrol the area looking for enemies or defend your base or even go look for the enemy runes. And you can kind of see how the dynamic goes from there. In addition to that, you'll also be able to summon turrets like morning stars and talismans and other different types of turrets that'll defend your home base based on the type of magic that you're using. And on top of that, you're not limited to one type of magic in the level, whereas you can spawn multiple types of runes depending on the types of enemies you're trying to fight. So you can see where it can get very complex, but thankfully the manual included gives you up-to-date rosters of weaknesses and strengths and what types of magics overpower the other types. So yes, it can get a little overwhelming, but there's always a strategy guide nearby to help you work through these levels and come out on top. Now, I will say this game is very, very difficult, and this is one of the things that the PS2 version was criticized for, in addition to its voice acting, which is also corrected in the remake. But the challenge, I'll put it this way. The battles can go anywhere from, say, 20 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on how good you are. And I have been in situations where I'm about 30 or 40 minutes to a level, and I make some type of mistake, and my runes get destroyed, and I had to start all over again. So that can get very frustrating in terms of a playtime perspective. Luckily, the remake, GrimGrimoire OnceMore, addresses this and adds some very nice quality of life improvements. Number one, the one I'm most excited about is the fact that you can now save mid-battle. So let's say you're 10 minutes into a mission and you're doing really well, you can actually save it so that way if you screw up, at least you don't have to go replay the whole mission again, which I think is fantastic. Another thing they're adding to the remake is the ability to fast forward the action, because I will say, at the beginning of a mission, when you're trying to build up your forces and collect the mana, it can get a little tedious just watching these gatherers go back and forth. You can speed that up and definitely decrease your playtime, which I think is a welcome addition. And then on top of it, there's going to be some other really cool quality of life improvements. Obviously, they're going to improve the graphics and give it a lot of touch-ups. There's also going to be an in-game gallery to just sit and just ooh and ah over the wonderful hand-drawn art that Vanillaware is famous for. And you'll also get an in-game instruction manual and some adjustments made to the hard difficulty. But overall, they're definitely addressing a lot of the concerns for the PS2 version that kind of made it a little too difficult in some cases to bring this more into the modern age. And I'm really excited to get my hands on the new version when it drops sometime Q2 2023, and that is when, of course, the physical releases are scheduled to drop. So there are two versions you can get. You can either go with the standard version for the PS5, PS4, and Switch, which will be $49.99 US, and you can get that from all major retailers like GameStop, Amazon, what have you. It'll be very easy to find. But then if you're a real big fan, you want to get the tricked out limited edition for $89.99 US, you can go over directly to NIS's website and get those versions for any of the platforms you choose. And that's actually going to include a lot of cool goodies like a hardcover book, a CD soundtrack, an acrylic display, keychains, art cards, a collective box. So lots of stuff if you're an ultra fan. But again, the standard versions will be widely available through major retailers come Q2 2023. This is one that if you're a fan of Vanillaware or real-time strategy games, you will definitely not want to miss this one, especially with all the improvements they've made. And that is coming soon. Stay tuned for the next one where we're going to be talking about a shooter with real-time strategy elements after the break. And we're back with the next item on the docket for this episode of the Solar News Report. Like I said, we're moving from real-time strategy with GrimGrimoire OnceMore into a shooter with real-time strategy elements. This, of course, is the game Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime, which is getting a re-release on the Switch and a first-time release on the PS4 physically via limitedrungames.com. It is now open for pre-order until Sunday, January the 8th, 2023 at the standard limited run deadline of 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a little controversial because this isn't the first time this game has got a physical release and is going to definitely have an impact on the pricing of some of the existing versions, but we'll get into that very soon. If you've never played Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime, this is a very charming 2D space shooter, which I will argue has some real-time strategy elements, and we'll get into that very soon. This was originally released on September 9th, 2015 for Linux, OS X, Windows, and the Xbox One. Then got a PS4 release February 9th, 2016. And then finally, October 3rd, 2017, saw the re-release on the Switch platform. So this game's been out for a while. I've had this in my download history for a long time, but never got around to it. And then finally, when I saw that Limited Run was putting out a physical release, I'm like, yes, I missed out on this the first time. I'm finally going to get to play this. So I did put in a good amount of time, played the first half of the game, and I've come out with some really good impressions. So like I said, this is a 2D space shooter. Very loosely, the story is this. So the universe has been disrupted by the forces of anti-love. The forces of love that hold the universes together are now starting to disappear. So now you, along with your companions, must board a spaceship, go out and collect the 4 pieces of the Ardor reactor to restore peace and love to the universe. Very simple concept, and it can be either played one player with an AI pet companion, or you can play this ideally 2 to 4 player local couch co-op. There is no online functionality, making this very old school. And I've been told by a good friend of mine who goes by the name of The Gaming File on YouTube, I will post a link in the description. He mentioned that the 4-player co-op mode in this is just utterly frenetic and chaotic and not to be missed. So I'm hoping I get to try that soon. But my impressions are based on the single-player campaign where I played as the Avatar with the pet companion. So the game is broken up into 4 main areas that are divided into 4 levels plus a boss fight. So you've got about 20 levels to go through in this very cool game. And it is just, the charm of it is just wonderful. The art style was influenced directly by Sailor Moon and Katamari Damacy. So it's very trippy, colorful, and is definitely a pleasure to behold. It has a really good feel-good vibe to it, but is also very chaotic, fast-paced, and can get very frenzied and fun. So the way this works is you've got this giant spaceship and you've got all these different areas that you can command, whether it's your guns, your shield, your map, there's a Yamato cannon, and there's also your engine, which allows you to steer the ship. And the whole premise of the game is that you're supposed to be understaffed, which is supposed to create this very chaotic, frenzied gameplay where you're constantly going from station to station, prioritizing whether you should be driving your spaceship through the cosmos or defending against incoming forces or attacking those forces. And at any point, you might be running the guns, but then you find out that you're maybe about to hit a wall, so you got to race over to the steering wheel and start to redirect your ship. And then on top of that, in the 1-player mode, you'll also be able to issue commands to your AI companion to say, hey, time for you to hit the shield, or maybe go grab the Yamato cannon. So there's constantly this back and forth, prioritizing, which to me reminds me of a real-time strategy game. Even though this is a shooter, the whole idea of like the management and prioritizing attack versus defense versus motion definitely gives it that RTS feel, and some truly frenetic and like goosebump raising gameplay where you just, it gets so tense at certain points, but it's just so much fun, and the difficulty level is just right to not make it too frustrating. But again, even though the single player mode is very well balanced, I can see why this would get even more fun with some human companions where you start to punch each other in the arm when you make mistakes and all that fun, crazy stuff we were used to back in the days when we used to play couch co-op on the old gaming platforms. So essentially what will happen is there's two main types of levels. The more common type of level you'll encounter is where you have to go out and collect space bunnies, and then the more bunnies you collect, this will allow you to rank up to unlock further enhancements to your spaceship, other avatars you can play as, other pets you can use as your companion, and even other spaceships that you can use throughout the games that have different functions. So again, keeping the game very fresh from level to level and more reasons to come back to it and unlock further progress. But then there's other types of levels where you simply just have to defend your engine against incoming enemy attacks for a certain period of time, again giving it that real-time strategy flavor to the overall shooting mechanics. And then in terms of upgrading, you'll be able to shoot gift boxes that'll give you gems, where you can take these gems and then power up the different stations of your ship to again give it some type of resource management strategy element to overall give you multiple different ways to approach this very fun game. Now, very interestingly, in terms of a development, this game was developed by 3 people. Jamie Tucker, who was the main creative lead, and I watched some interviews with him, and he also worked with Matt Hamill and Adam Winkles, with the music being done by Ryan Hedwood. So it was a very small team, and this game started off life as a very simple concept at a Toronto-based game jam back in 2012, as explained by Jamie Tucker, the main lead, when I watched an interview with him. So what would happen is they would go to these game jams, because it was a very vibrant scene in Toronto back in like the late aughts and early 2010s, where they'd go to these game jams, come up with very simple concepts, and then all the developers would meet at a bar afterward to share their concepts and show off their projects. Well, again, they must have come up with something very cool, because a lot of developers were coming up to them saying, hey, I really like your concept, and here's what I'd like to see going forward. And in terms of inspirations, the reason why they came up with this was because they wanted to make something co-op based with everybody having different roles, because one of the games that the developers were playing at the time was known as Artemis on the PC. And if you've never played Artemis, this is a Star Trek style bridge simulator where literally every person on your team has their own PC and has their own specific role on this spaceship to play out. So they wanted to take that grand hardcore concept and distill it down into the very simple concept that would become Lovers in Dangerous Spacetime. And in terms of other influences, Jamie Tucker did mention how back in the day he was a big fan of Left 4 Dead on the Xbox 360. Again, a classic co-op shooter where each person has their different job to do. So you can see how those different elements came together to form the basis for Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime. So, based on the feedback they were getting at these game jams, they decided to go with it, turn it into a full-fledged concept, and the first time they decided to show it off to the public was at the 2013 PAX. And based on the good feedback, it was doing very well. Xbox decided to step in and decided to make it as part of their ID at Xbox program, eventually getting it the release date in 2015 on Xbox and PC to come to other platforms later on. So this game's been kind of a cult classic for the last few years, and in terms of physical iterations, the one that is now open for pre-order at limited run is not the first. The first time this game got a physical release was in 2016 as a big box PC release on a USB drive via IndieBox, but then in 2018 got a Switch physical release via Super Rare Games. And this is where the controversy comes in, because that game soon became one of the most expensive games for the Switch, and the reason why I was really disappointed, I missed out on it, and when I went to get it later, I couldn't buy it because it was so expensive. So you can imagine my delight when I heard that Limited Run was going to put out another version for the Switch, as well as the PS4, which I typically prefer to buy. But of course, it's caused some controversy in the collecting community, with the people who bought the original Super Rare release saying, hey, now my version is going to go down in value. But again, that's just the way it kind of goes. But thankfully, anybody who missed out on that can now go to limitedrungames.com until Sunday, January the 8th, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and get either the Switch or the PS4 standard versions for $29.99 USD. And man, this game, again, like I said, has so much charm. The graphics are fantastic. The level of difficulty is just right. And if you do have other human bodies you can play this with, this is where the game can truly reach its most fun potential. But even without that couch co-op, the single player experience is a lot of fun. I highly recommend this if you're a fan of shooters with a bit of a real-time strategy flavor to it, something not to be missed, and you've got another chance to get this physically. So we're moving from RTS with GrimGrimoire OnceMore to shooter with RTS elements with Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime, and now with our third game we're going to strictly shooter. This is a classic, finally getting a release for the Switch physically. You don't want to miss this one. Stay tuned. And we're back with the final game on the docket for this jam-packed episode of the Solar News Report. Of course, I mentioned we're going to be talking about a classic shooter and a remake of one of the most classic shooters of all time. This one, of course, is Tempest 4000, which is now getting a physical version for the Nintendo Switch via limitedrungames.com. It's currently ordered for pre-order now until Sunday, January the 1st, 2023 at the standard limited run deadline of 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This game had already had a physical release on the PS4, which I've played for this video, and the Xbox One. You can still get these, and I'll get more into the details after, but first, the game. If you've never played Tempest, it originally started out life as the 1981 arcade classic designed by David Thurr, which came out from Atari and set the standard for 3D shooters to come. This game was so ahead of its time, uses like vector and geometric prisms to create this kind of 3D effect that still holds up to this day, and you can actually play via the Atari 50 compilation, which I'm going to be talking about in a future episode. Very cool, very classic. But this game, Tempest 4000, is the modern, psychedelic reimagining of that original title and has a very interesting history in terms of its creator, Jeff Minter, under the company Llamasoft, and his very rocky relationship with Atari, which we'll be getting into soon. So very briefly, Tempest 4000, if you've never played it, is a modern reimagining of the original Tempest, where you control this ship called the Claw in this pseudo three-dimensional space where you go along a geometric prism, shooting enemies, avoiding obstacles, collecting power-ups to upgrade your guns, and add cool little features like AI companions and jump features. And essentially, you're just trying to survive, collect the high score, and you can even use this thing called the Super Zapper, which is a screen-clearing bomb if things get a little too hectic in the game space. So, of course, you have this frenetic shooting experience over 100 different levels in 3 different game modes. There's a pure mode where you start off with 3 levels and try to get as far as you can, or there's a slightly less difficult survival mode where you start with 9 lives and try to get through it. But the cool thing is that as you unlock different levels, you'll be able to go to a classic mode where you can start from example level 7 with a certain score bonus to get you started and see if you can get to level 100 and complete the whole game. And this game gets very fast, frenetic, and challenging as you progress through it, of course, like any classic arcade shooter. And I will say what's cool about this is that the game, when you originally boot it up, you can go into the options menu and see the very basic controls. So there's like a shooting mechanic, there's a button to activate your Super Zapper bomb, there's also a jump button. But then, like any classic game, there are a lot of secrets that you can just uncover by playing it. For example, what it doesn't tell you is that there is this cool mechanic where you can hold the left trigger to shoot left and right. And this comes in handy, for example, if an enemy gets too close to the screen to the outer rim. And when they do this, you can eventually get caught and killed, whereas you can give yourself a fighting chance to resume the game by just shooting left and right and holding your ship in place. So there's a lot of strategy involved with this too that you can just learn by playing the game. And of course, you have the incredible hallucinatory psychedelic visuals, the particle effects, the very trippy stuff going on in the background at 4K resolution, in addition to a pumping 90s techno soundtrack, which gets you into the mood for the game. But of course, there are different selectable soundtracks. You can listen to old chiptune and even variations off of an old game that Jeff Minter of Llamasoft did in 2015 called TXK, which lends a bit of controversy to the history of this game, and we'll get more into that. So let's talk about the history of the game and why it's so controversial. We want to go back all the way to 1994 to start with. Jeff Minter originally made Tempest 2000 for the Atari Jaguar, which was one of its highest selling titles and a modern reimagining of the original Tempest. And I did go back and play Tempest 2000, also available on the Atari 50 collection, and this game definitely holds up. It has really great visuals for the day and establishes a lot of the premises for what Tempest 4000 would become eventually. But to get to Tempest 4000, Jeff Minter and Atari would have a very rocky relationship going forward. So let's get more into that. Fast forward several years later to 2015, Jeff Minter, under his new company Llamasoft, decided to make a spiritual successor to Tempest called TXK. And this game essentially was a ripoff of Tempest. This wasn't just a successor, this was everything Tempest was, with just a name change, and caught the ire of Atari so much that Atari stepped in and blocked Llamasoft from making any versions on other platforms. So for many years, the wonderfully brilliant TXK remained stranded on the PS Vita, but then a few years later, out of the blue, to everyone's surprise, Jeff Minter announced that he was partnering with Atari to put out Tempest 4000 for the PS4, Xbox One, and Windows, and this would come out on July 17th, 2018, to everyone's surprise. And if you've played Tempest 4000 and TXK, they are essentially identical, with maybe like minor changes. So if you missed out on TXK, don't worry, you'll get pretty much the full experience in Tempest 4000. And then eventually, this would also get released earlier this year, March 22nd of 2022, for the Nintendo Switch and the Atari VCS micro console for everybody to enjoy. So going back to the physical version, I did get this quite a while back on the PS4. You can also get it on the Xbox One from major retailers. And I'd say it goes for about 15 to 16 US, although I noticed on most pages that they have very limited quantities remaining. So I would definitely say that this game's probably out of print for the PS4 and Xbox One. And if you do want to add it to your library for a very reasonable price, you'll probably want to act sooner than later. But of course, if you want to get this on the Switch, you can now do this via limitedrungames.com until Sunday, January the 1st, 2023, until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This one is going for $34.99 US as a basic standard version, finally for the Switch, with all the updates and bells and whistles included. So if you're a fan of classic arcade shooters like Tempest, and especially this one, which even the original from 1981 still looks so pretty to this day, and the modern reimagining in the guise of Tempest 4000 just plays so beautifully. The controls are tight, there's enough challenge to keep you coming back, enough modes to keep you invested in it, and just, it's something that's so simple and beautiful that you can really show off your wonderful 4K TV with it, and put it on at a party where it's just so simple to get into that anybody can just grab a controller and get into it. So I definitely recommend this for the Nintendo Switch, but also for other platforms if you haven't gotten this yet. This has been a jam-packed installment of the Solar News Report on episode 37 of the Collecting Confidant. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll be back again in 2 weeks to cover the Atari 50 compilation. You do not want to miss this one. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2023. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.